What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Survivorflux. Today, we're going to be recapping episode 2 of Winners at War. So, as usual, let's start with the token count as of the end of this episode. Amber, Danny, and Sandra have 0 tokens. Jeremy has 1. Rob has 2. Natalie has 2. And Denise has 2. So, even everyone else has 1. I included Jeremy, who only has 1 on here because he did go from 2 to 1 in this episode. But now that that's out of the way, we start with Edge of Extinction. Amber's still fighting. It's a really short little segment. We will jump back to Edge of Extinction in a couple of minutes. But I found it really interesting. The next scene is Rob getting his coin. Everyone was speculating what's Rob's face going to look like going into this episode when they show up at the challenge and Amber's not there. But they actually chose to show us Rob getting his coin, and that gave him a good indication that Amber had been voted out. But he actually thinks it might have been Sandra that gave him his coin, which, knowing Sandra's feelings going into the season towards Rob and Amber, it's funny that he still thinks Sandra and him have a connection. It seems like everyone but Natalie and Jeremy and possibly Sandra don't really realize the exact implications of the coins or exactly what the coins can get them. But then we jump over and Denise finds an idol. We see Ben helping her find the idol. He's clearly trying to play a stronger social game this time. He's giving her clues as to how to find an idol, what to look for. And she finds an idol, and she says she wouldn't have found it without Ben. And it's interesting because Ben immediately says to use it to bring someone else into their group. Some people have wondered, why wouldn't Ben feel kind of entitled? Well, he didn't find it. He was helping her look and giving her search tips. But Denise is the one that found it. And I think that he's just trying to play a stronger social game and make connections with people. But Denise actually winds up saying she trusts Ben. So I think this was a decent move. There was no way he could be like, the other half's mine, the other half's mine. And she might have handed it over to him, but I don't think that would have been very tactful. And then we see Denise go to talk to Adam, and she suggests giving it to Parvati, which immediately Adam shuts it down. He shuts it down. And Adam clearly seems skeptical of Ben. He finds out that Ben's the only other one that knows about it. But Ben seems to trust Adam. He's the one that let Adam in on the last vote. Kind of saved Adam. Adam did save himself by suggesting Natalie and Jeremy were a better target. But Ben is the reason he knew he was in danger. And Adam kind of takes the opposite tactic of Ben. But Denise really seems to respect Adam's opinion. And she winds up giving the other half to Adam, which definitely wasn't a bad move. Those two have complete trust in each other. Whereas Ben and Denise, we haven't really seen them interact in the past. And Denise really seems to trust Adam and his opinion. Whereas her past partner, Malcolm, was a really good social partner to have. Adam's a really strategical partner. And that doesn't mean that Denise doesn't have her own strategy and that that's not one of her strong suits. But she's said at least once, if not 2 or 3 times, that Adam really understands the strategic aspects of this game. And then we jump back over to the Red Tribe. We see Yule with Kim trying to get food from the trees. Kim mentions being on the bottom, how she's not used to it. And I think that this could be a real theme as far as her having an upward trajectory. She realizes she's starting at the bottom and the only place to go from there is up. And then we see Kim searching for an idol. 2 back-to-back idol scenes, which isn't very common. And Kim describes her Zen methods of finding idols. That's fine, whatever you need to do. And she winds up finding the idol and is disappointed that it's a split idol. And Tony and Nick walk up on Kim. She's worried about hiding it. And they kind of cut it in such a way. I was wondering, where in the world did she hide that idol on her body? Because she was only wearing, I think, a bikini. But the way that they cut it, I guess she could have dropped it and gone back to grab it after Tony and Nick passed. And it seems like the obvious person for Kim to give the other half of her idol to is Tyson. They're both on the outs. They clearly have some trust with each other, and they're in that so-called quote-unquote poker alliance. But Kim almost takes the approach that Denise was thinking as far as Denise giving it to Parvati, because Kim wants to really bring someone in, gain some trust with someone who's possibly on the other side. And she winds up giving the other half to Sophie, which Sophie is just really surprised about. She's not like, ha ha ha, I'm totally going to betray you because of this. But Sophie just doesn't necessarily say that that's a good move. She just doesn't really understand exactly what Kim was thinking as far as giving it to Sophie. And then we jump back to the Edge of Extinction. This is more of a typical Edge of Extinction segment where they get a clue. They're looking around, trying to figure it out. It doesn't seem like Amber exactly knows that what they're looking for is a way to get fire tokens. But since Natalie had figured this all out in the previous episode, she knows exactly what her mission is. We see them kind of looking around together. They climb the steps and they pass the water well, but neither one looks in. I'm not sure if Natalie kind of thought that would be a good place to look and decided to go back without Amber or what, but she does wind up going back to the water well and finding, I guess you would call it an advantage. She finds what they were looking for. And it's essentially the fact that she can offer someone safety without power in exchange for a fire token. And safety without power, they did this with Janet in the previous season, and Janet wound up rejecting it when it was offered to her. But it essentially means you can just step your way out of tribal council. You don't get a vote, but you just get to walk away. You're not eligible to be voted for, and you're safe for another round, which I think is a pretty cool advantage. It's definitely a twist on any of the other ones that we've seen. And she wants to keep Jeremy safe. The last thing she saw was that Jeremy's probably on the outs. That tribe hasn't gone to tribal since Jeremy was voted out. And she also knows, having given him a token, or at least can assume that he has two tokens himself, his own and the one Natalie gave him. And then we jump over and see Jeremy get the offer, and he thinks it must be from Natalie. It's a no-brainer. He immediately accepts the offer and gives up his fire token. And then we got to talk for a second about Tony's ladder. I was surprised they gave so much time to this, but it was a nice little segment. Tyson says that he's surely crazy, and we see everyone just telling Tony, don't do this, don't do this. And it's a nice little scene, you know. I like that Tony's assimilating more with the group, and from there Sarah actually says something to that effect, that she really likes that people are seeing the likable side of Tony. And so if Tony's got energy to burn it that way, in a group setting as opposed to going off on your own, making spy shacks, looking for idols, that kind of thing. And then we get to my favorite scene in the entire episode. For those who don't know, in season 28, Tony and Sarah had an alliance. Cops Are Us. They're both cops in real life. And then Tony betrayed Sarah at the merge because she was so indecisive. And they played again together in Game Changers, and Sarah wasn't really responsible for it, but Tony got voted out second, and Sarah wound up winning. And Sarah says that they've known each other 6 years, and that before, when she had the Cops Are Us alliance, she didn't really know what she was getting into, but now she knows who Tony is, so she knows exactly where he's coming from, thinks she'll have a really good read on him. And Sarah and Tony wind up talking. Sarah's afraid of being perceived as a pair, but Tony doesn't mind it if people are suspicious. Basically, if they're already going to assume they're a pair, why not just be a pair? And they reignite the Cops Are Us alliance, which I'm really happy about. I think that could really benefit both of them moving forward. And so now we're getting into the challenge. As each tribe walks up, Rob seems to be mean-mugging the other side, but then Jeff asks if Amber being voted out is a shot at Rob. And Rob, I thought he was going to wind up saying something stupid, but he doesn't really seem to answer the question that Jeff asked, but his answer is smart. He says, it's tough, but it's a game, I get it. That's exactly how I think he needed to react to that. People expect him to be emotional. He doesn't necessarily need to hide that. I mean, he's disappointed his wife got voted out, but he just simply says he gets it, it's a game. And then we get into a grueling physical immunity challenge. The most interesting thing to me is that they decided to put Rob on the puzzle, because even though Rob is a little older than the last time he played, he's been doing really well in these physical challenges. He's been an asset. But in Rob's own right, he is known for being great at puzzles. But it seems like someone else who is good at puzzles, who is less physical, could have done it. But we see the blue tribe, Rob's tribe, Sele, start to come back from behind, but it seems like they really flop on the puzzle, largely due to Rob's strategy of sorting the pieces. They're behind going into the puzzle, but actually catch up on that first section. And it seems like from there they start to sort the pieces, and that's what makes them fall behind. And I do have to say, Sandra seems to be really decent at the puzzle. She's always made fun of for being so bad in challenges, but she holds her own here. And then a little interesting side note is Tony says, make them panic, and then gets people to cheer, trying to get into the other team's heads. I thought that was funny. It just seems like Rob's head isn't in the game. It almost looks like he's trying to throw the challenge, but I can't really see the strategy there. Some people have argued online that he's trying to go to Exile Island to be with his wife. That's ridiculous in my mind. If they wind up having a competition to get back in the game, which I'm sure they will, They both can't get back in the game, and there's $2 million at stake. So he's going to be thinking about his family first, not the short term. And then there's also the argument that he's trying to appear weak, but I think Amber getting voted out is enough to make him appear weak. So I think it's more that his head just wasn't in the game during the challenge. And he admits at the end that he completely blew it and it wasn't even close. And then we see Parvati mention going into the pre-tribal segment that a new schooler has to go. Cut to commercial, and Ethan says, "Dude, you suck today." We see a little conversation between Ethan, Rob, and Adam. And Rob tells us he feels secure in the relationships that he's building. And if you think about it, going into this vote, before Danny gets voted out, we have 4 old schoolers: Danny, Parvati, Ethan, and Rob. And then we have 5 new schoolers: Jeremy, Ben, Denise, Michelle, and Adam. And so Rob essentially is trying to, at the beginning of this, figure out which new schooler they can pull over and which they should vote out, because they need a 5-4 advantage, but they also need to knock one of those new schoolers out. And he mentions Jeremy being on the bottom and Ben being sketchy. And then we see Ethan, Parvati, and Rob discussing this. Danny feels on the outs. And this is such a bad move for Danny, just such a flop. I understand there being paranoia, but Danny feels like she's on the outs of the old school. She doesn't really go directly to any of them to talk to them about it until she goes to talk to Rob about it. And paranoia gets to her because in reality at this point, she's not on the outs with those people at all. And then in the dumbest move of the episode, we see her discuss with Ethan and Ben, 2 big players, one in the old faction, one in the new school faction. And she tells Ben that Rob says it's old school versus new school. And Ben even says that this is a little awkward. You know I'm an old schooler, right? So Danny basically reveals the plans of people who are in her alliance, thinking she's on the outs of that alliance. And Ethan also can't seem to believe that Danny gave up the information. So Ben talks to Jeremy, Ethan, and Adam, says to get rid of Danny. They need Rob and Parvati in the challenges, and if they got rid of Danny, that would prove that what Danny was saying wasn't the case, that there is no distinct old school versus new school. And then maybe this is the dumbest move of the episode. I don't want to hate on Danny too much. I think she was a great player in her season, but as far as bad moves for this episode, we see Danny talking directly to Rob about feeling on the outs of it. Danny suggests to Rob that they get rid of Parvati. Rob says he's in. Of course, you just have to agree at the time. And then goes to talk to Ethan and Adam about the conversation. And then Adam tells us that this is great for him, seeing the old schoolers turn on each other. And he lets us know if he had a choice, it would be Parvati, but Danny is more of a unified vote. And this is smart for him. He doesn't need to push a bigger target as long as they're picking off an old schooler. And he says something like this going into Tribal about how he's not going to win the game if he doesn't make risky moves. But at this point, I don't think that they need to make that risky move. They will easily have a 5-3 number advantage over the old schoolers going into the next episode. And then they have some of their stronger players if they don't wind up dividing the tribes, which they'll be at 17 players after this episode. So I'd be really surprised if they wound up dividing the tribes at 17, unless they had someone go to some kind of exile island type of thing and then had them sit in on the tribal council and join that tribe, kind of like they did with Carl and David vs. Goliath. But I think it's much more likely that we see them split at 16, and then we get to see these 2 tribes one more episode. And then we see Ethan tell Parvati that Danny's after her. Even Parvati's like, why would Danny tell Rob? Not just why is Danny after me, but why would she tell Rob? They're each other's number 1 ally at this point. And then I'm really happy they gave us a nice little conversation with Jeremy and Michelle, and they were the 2 that were on the outs of that tribe's last vote. They both didn't know Natalie was going home and voted for Adam and Denise respectively. And Jeremy asked, do we go along with this, or do we flip the game and take control? And I think, in a way, kind of going back to what I was saying about Adam, they don't need to just flip everything on its head. If they're in the majority of this vote, if the new schoolers unify, then that does give them control of the game at this point. And if they trust that the plan is actually Danny, that Danny will get a majority of the votes, I think it's a smarter way to go. So going into Tribal, they've given us basically, it might be Parvati, it might be Danny. And I definitely, going into this, felt like it was Danny. But they did do a good job of giving us reasonable doubt. And then Tribal Council, two biggest moments of Tribal Council. Ben bringing up the conversation where Danny revealed the old versus new. Once again, we see Ben in the hot seat, and he says the old schoolers are being paranoid, and it's causing the new schoolers to be paranoid too. And then Parvati asks, "So we're making you paranoid?" And then he says, "I'm not paranoid, but everyone's just paranoid." And so it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then throughout that, we see some whispering going on, and I thought that might be them switching their vote to Ben, but that would seem a little ridiculous based on who we saw whispering to each other and how far along they are in their plans. But obviously, the second biggest moment in that tribal council is Rob having everyone dump out their bag. It's a Survivor first. That's never happened before. And for those of you guys who are like, why did they get bags this season? They always get some kind of bag. They're just not always so flamboyant, or they're not red and blue. They look more tribal nature usually, but they do have bags. They don't always bring them to tribal council if they feel safe, but they're always given some kind of bag. And a lot of people have wondered, why did everyone just dump out their bag? But you got to think about it. For everyone who doesn't have an idol, and you see Rob do it, and then Ethan do it, of course, because he's right there and they're in an alliance. If you don't have an idol, why not just dump out your bag? I mean, you don't want to be the only person who's not showing that they don't have an idol, but also if you don't have an idol, there's no reason not to just prove it right there and then. And then, I don't know if you guys caught it, but we see Denise grip the idol inside her bag so that when she dumps it out, she's actually clutching the idol still inside her bag, but everything else falls out. And I think throughout this, the big takeaway is that obviously Rob has a lot of control. He's playing a very mafioso game, but more than that, Adam just looks bad because he's like, if that's how you want to play, why should we dump out our bags? And he just doesn't need to speak up. If they don't see that he has the idol after everyone dumps out their bag, I don't think he needs to really call anyone or Rob out or just be like, this isn't how we need to be playing. And Adam and Denise are positioned almost as good as possible, with Rob way over on the other side, our left, and then the two of them to the furthest right. And Adam says it's all about relationships, etc., but draws more attention to himself than necessary. And then they go to vote, and we see that the only person that didn't vote for Danny is Danny herself, who voted for Parvati. She doesn't seem that surprised to be voted out, though. Then Danny bequeaths her token to Denise. I think she just didn't know exactly who to give it to. She wasn't really strongly aligned with anyone, but she definitely didn't want to give it to one of the old schoolers. And then we see Danny, during the credits, get to Edge of Extinction, and she tells Natalie and Amber that they have a lot to talk about, which I thought was kind of interesting because essentially Danny was betrayed by Rob. Rob agreed to vote for Parvati, and Amber on Edge of Extinction is Rob's wife. So I don't know I mean, she might just wind up telling them what she thinks happened, but it's not like Amber's going to be like, my husband's, how could he do that to you? Like, no, I think that Danny giving less information would be a lot wiser. But overall, I thought this was a really solid episode. We got some good, not that we didn't get good character moments in the first episode, but it feels like the pace slowed down in this episode in the right way. It definitely wasn't a boring episode. A lot happened, but we did get a little more character development. And during my last review, I said that I thought that the new schoolers would wind up aligning against the old schoolers. We didn't really see all 5 of them come together necessarily, but it definitely feels like that's what happened. And then the fact that Danny was going around talking to everyone else, I think it was just a real unanimous vote, and so we didn't necessarily need those 5 to completely team up. It was the entire tribe that kind of decided to vote Danny out. And so let's do a little idol and advantage add up. So Sandra's idol is good for 1 more tribal, unless it only counts the tribals that she goes to. But I believe that it's 3 tribal councils in general, like it is in Australian Survivor. So she would only be able to use it at their next tribal council. And then we have 4 half idols. So Sophie and Kim have half of 1 idol. Adam and Denise have half of 1 idol. One interesting thing that I've thought of is, like, if somehow Adam wanted to pair his half an idol with Kim's half an idol? Can all four of them just pair any half that they have with any of the other three's half an idol? But I don't really think that that's how it works. I don't think it will matter in general, but that is something that I had thought about. And we're down to 17 players now. 3 girls have been voted out, all for very different reasons. I don't think they're necessarily just picking off the weak. I think they did pick off Danny over Parvati because they felt like she wasn't as necessary to the tribe. But Natalie is one of the strongest, if not the strongest girls out there. And then Amber was picked off because of her marriage to Rob, because of that connection. So it feels like Natalie picked off because she's a big threat, Amber picked off because of her connections, and then Danny picked off because she's coming off as untrustworthy. And so I don't think it necessarily has to do with some kind of gender thing. And then there's no way that all the guys would want to stick together till the end and have to fight against each other throughout the post merge. So I think that that's largely coincidence. But yeah, I'm really excited for the next episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you haven't yet, please like, subscribe, comment below. Let me know what your thoughts were on this episode. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.